meeting of the Economy Committee. We're just waiting if there's anybody to enter the public gallery.
This is 22nd.
It was just in the meantime, just to remind you that this meeting is broadcast as a public session and you will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online as well. Apologies, the Chair, Philip Brett. I don't think we have any other apologies.
Yeah.
No. Yep. Okay. Declarations of interest. If anybody have any declarations of interest, if you let us know at the relevant point throughout the meeting. Chairperson's business. There is none. Draft minutes. So I refer members to page 6 of their packs, where they will find a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting of 15th of May 2024. If those who were in attendance at the meeting are content that the draft minutes are an accurate and complete record of the committee's deliberations at its last meeting, if you could just signal your approval, please.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Matters arising. Members, are there any matters arising from the minutes? If not, are members content to proceed down the agenda?
Yep.
Okay, we're now going to invite Nickma into the meeting.
Orange.
Good morning, members. The committee will now receive a written and oral evidence from the Northern Ireland Childminding Association, NICMA, on issues affecting the childcare sector. The clerk's cover note is at page 19. I also refer members to the briefing paper, the NICMA Sector Report, 2023 Employers for Childcare Survey Report, and a number of other items as well you'll find in your packs. I just want to welcome Patricia Loosley-Mooney, the CBE and CEO of NICMA, and Andrea Knocker, Regional Development Manager of NICMA as well. You're both very, very welcome here to the committee today. I'm just going to offer the floor to yourselves to provide maybe a brief oral statement, and obviously we'll take questions then following that, okay? Over to yourselves.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee, on giving me the opportunity to make this presentation this morning. Many of you know a childcare strategy is long overdue, and I welcome the fact that the Executive is now making it one of its priorities. And we know that the Department of Education is taking the lead on the childcare strategy, but I believe there's a responsibility on a number of departments to be involved in that. And I know that the Department of the Economy has representation on the Interdepartmental Childcare Sustainability Task and Finish Group. But childcare needs to be on this department's radar continuously. Incorporating childcare as a key part of the economy is not just about supporting parents, but is a strategic investment in the future workforce, economy stability and social well-being. Governments, businesses and communities should prioritise childcare to ensure that sustainable economic growth, gender equality and the development of future generations. As the Chair has said, I know I provided you with a briefing paper, but there's a few issues I'd like to address. NICMA was established in 1984 and is the only organisation in Northern Ireland that supports individuals into self-employment as registered childminders or approved home childcarers. We are the first point of contact by the trusts when someone declares an interest in becoming a registered childminder or an approved home childcarer. We are then funded for our development and engagement officers to provide support from the start of the process to the final registration. We are also funded to provide mandatory training. Once registered, we provide further support through our membership package, which includes their public liability insurance. We create buddy groups, WhatsApp groups, and deliver a range of further information and training sessions. We also deliver support to non-members. In the last year, we've delivered 39 surveys to all registered childminders, capturing the data to deliver services, additional training and even lobbying. A registered childminder offers a home-from-home based childcare, caring for a maximum of 6 children a day. But as we've seen the change in working patterns, especially since COVID, they could have more children in their setting over a week. Whereas an approved home childcare provides the childcare in the child's home. NICMA has seen a decline of just over 50% of registered childminders over the last 19 years. So in 2005, there were 4,383 childminders. Today, we have 2,078. And there's many reasons for this. Originally, there was a big decline in 2012 in the introduction of minimum standards, and so that would be one of the issues. Approved home childcares are a new type of childcare provision which was introduced into Northern Ireland approximately about 10 years ago. And they have decreased over the last number of years from 263 to 274. An approved home childcare would help, in particular, parents that have children with additional needs or a larger number of children in a family. But even I think there's an opportunity for them to help parents who live in rural areas who don't always have the access to childminders that others would have. In the past year, we've seen 154 registered childminders leaving childminders, while we created 113 new ones. So as you can see, while we're trying to create new posts, there are more leaving the sector. So while we need to look at how we focus on bringing new registered childminders and approved home childcares into the sector, we need to also look at to see how we can retain those that are already there. Again, there's been a slight increase in the number of approved home childcares, and that is because we've conducted a number of new pilots. During the COVID pandemic, registered childminders provided 71% of childcare places, enabling key workers to continue to work while many alternative daycare settings closed and were able to furlough their staff. Home-based childcare has a twofold purpose. Firstly, it helps working parents, particularly mothers, the choice of a flexible childcare option, while approved home childcares offer invaluable support to families who have multiple children, a child with additional needs, or those who live in rural areas. Both give parents the opportunity to pursue employment or educational opportunities while ensuring their children receive quality home-based childcare. This support is essential for maintaining workforce participation, but promoting economic stability within families and reducing the risk of financial hardship. And secondly, childcare provided by registered childminders and approved home childcares is employment in itself, while also generating economic activity through the expenditure of funds on goods and services necessary for operating the childcare business. This includes spending on supplies, equipment, utilities, insurance and professional development. Additionally, the income earned by our registered childminders and approved home childcares circulates then within their local economy, supporting other businesses and services. The economic contribution of our registered childminders and approved home childcares extends beyond the immediate impact on employment and spending. By supporting early childhood development and school readiness, these early caregivers lay the foundation for future economic success by fostering the skills, capabilities and potential of young children. This investment in human capital contributes to long-term economic growth, productivity and competitiveness. I'd like to share with you a few challenges that our registered childminders and approved home childcares face at the minute. So establishing and maintaining a childminding business involves significant initial investment in training, insurance, equipment, coupled with the potential fluctuations in income. NICMA is presently working with some of the councils through their labour market partnerships, creating childcare academies. And we have been then, through those academies, able to give start-up grants, and we've seen an increase then in the number of people coming forward. Working independently at home or in a child's own home can lead to feelings of isolation for registered childminders and approved home childcares, lacking the camaraderie and support found in a traditional workplace environment. So that's why it's important for us that we have funded development engagement officers who can work with all of our childminders and approved home childcares on a one-to-one basis or at the end of the phone, but also the reason why we created buddy groups and obviously since COVID, WhatsApp groups. Due to the demand of affordable childcare, there continues to be the growth and the competition from unregistered and unregulated childminders, particularly since COVID. We are working presently with the Department of Health on this issue to see how we can regulate this better. Lastly, for us, the extension is to the 22.5 free hours for the 3 to 4 year olds and the expansion of after school setting. This will have a huge negative impact on registered childminders in particular, because the way the criteria is set up, it automatically excludes them from being able to apply that 22.5 free hours. In conclusion, registering as a childminder approved home childcare offers individuals the opportunity to start and manage their own small business for the provision of childcare, which contributes to the diversity and resilience of the economy by fostering innovation and competition within the childcare sector. In addition, the contribution of these childcare professionals to economic growth and productivity extends beyond the provision of childcare services, encompassing employment generation, support for working parents, economic activity, and reduces public expenditure. In finishing, I would ask that whatever economic strategy is delivered by the Assembly, that childcare is an integral part of that, thus helping us to not just grow the economy by allowing parents to work, but by childcare contributing to the economy by creating employment. At present, it has created approximately 2,242 jobs, and that's not counting the assistance that many will have, delivering childcare to approximately 13,500 children, which needs to be funded and supported by government. Can I thank you for listening to my presentation today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Patricia, thank you, and Andy as well, and I suppose just to commend you for the work that your organisation has done, not least during COVID, obviously, but right throughout. And there's a clear recognition, I think, right across all parties in the Assembly that childcare must be a priority and is a priority, and we need to see a strategy be brought forward as soon as possible. There's a recognition that it's cross-cutting as well. We have a particular interest from an economic perspective, obviously, and the role that childminders and carers and those within the sector play in terms of allowing people, obviously, to see their full potential as well. So I suppose for me, just a couple of points. I was interested to hear in relation to the childcare academies. Obviously, it's concerning to see the numbers of registered childminders reducing, particularly when we look now at this particular time in 2024. The childcare academies, you mentioned that they were rolled out in a number of council areas. Could you maybe tell us what difference that's having on the ground? Obviously, there's a benefit to, in terms of support and finance, but is it bringing more people into the sector? And how do we get other councils to follow suit so it's not, as we talk about quite often, like a postcode lottery?
Okay, so we started it actually in 2020 with Mid and East Antrim Council, and they asked us would we come to a job fair, and from that we created the academy. And then after that, the labour market partnerships obviously came through the Department of Communities. So we started off, and this is our 4th year then with the Mid and East Antrim Academy. It's very straightforward, it's not bureaucratic, it's not paper driven. And we've had 10 new childminders each year within the Mid and East Antrim. This year we're going for 7 childminders and 3 approved home childcares, and up until now we have them all in place. The issue for us is the registration. So when you become a childminder, it's a parallel process. So the Trust get in touch with us with a name, we get in touch with those, we do what we call an information session. And then if you're still interested after that, there's a social worker from the early years team will get involved, so they take you down the path of everybody in your household over the age of 10 is vetted. They do a background check, you have to get a GP's letter of recommendation, so they do all of that bit. Then we do the other bit where we take them through all their mandatory training, so they do 3 hours first aid, 3 hours health and safety, and 3 hours paediatric first aid, health and safety and safeguarding. They have to then do a further 9 hours of paediatric first aid before the first year's inspection. We can do all our bit within 3 months. We actually give them extra training. We give them a starter kit, which is their
Stargate first aid kit, child locks, thermometers, anything a childminder would need to start their business in their own home.
And an approved home childcare then wouldn't obviously get a Stargate, so they get a booster seat or a baby seat for the car. So to answer your question is, we then put in a tender to Mid-Ulster. They were the next one to come to us, but it was very bureaucratic. We were having meetings every 2 weeks to tell them the same thing, that things hadn't moved. The problem is the registration process. Before it was taking 3 to 6 months, now it's taken 6 to 9 months and beyond that. In fact, we've been 18 months on this and we still haven't got 2 people registered because the social worker took sick and nobody's taken over the case. We applied for the same tender with Fermanagh and Omagh, and they gave it to Southwestern College, who couldn't deliver because they had no understanding of the process. And they're the only 3 councils at the minute. We're actually working with Belfast City Council now. They have come on board and asked us, but out of the 11 then, at the minute we only have 1 definite that we've been doing for 4 years, and we're now in the process of Belfast City Council. So
It's quite interesting because, you know, when I was reading through your stuff, I can see from it's a difficult balance because there's obviously parents want to ensure that all of the checks and balances are there and that their child, and that clearly you're advocating for that, and you clearly have a robust training programme. But on the other side, you know, there's probably evidence to suggest that it's putting people off actually coming into the sector, in the sense that, is it, you know, in terms of the length of the process.
we've lost 2 people recently because of that.
Yeah,
They just give up. They've got a job somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that we'll certainly follow up as a committee as well. I was just going to bring Johnny in just on a point. Yeah.
It's just on this point from the chair. So this is an initiative that is essentially brought forward by the council. So if we go back to the genesis of this, Mid and East Antrim, was it via a motion? How did this come about that they approached you to look at something like
They were
this?
running a job fair and they asked us if we would come and give a presentation because they knew of a couple of people in the borough that were interested in becoming childminders.
Okay.
And it was after that presentation then the council engaged with us and said, look, if we could get you. So at that stage it was £6,000, 10 women through,
Yeah.
you know.
And do you believe that academy model, if rolled out across the board, would essentially address this huge drop-off in registered childminders?
Absolutely.
You would advocate that this would be the way to go if we could get a whole local government approach?
So we're talking about £850 per head to put someone through this process. Now, if you're on benefit or you're on low wage, then you wouldn't have that £850 to spend out to start your business. So that we find that once that money has been available, which we have used through the funding that we've got, then we are finding that there's more interest in that.
It seems to me like a really ideal way to try to really plug this gap. We all here as colleagues in this assembly just how pressing the issue of childcare is. So I suppose I'm a bit stumped as to why the hold up here is essentially, I don't understand why other councils don't want to get on board quicker. And then also the Department of Health seems to be the hold up. Would that be a fair assessment of the checks and balances that are required on that side? We're not seeing the same urgency.
No.
No, that's...
And I spoke to the Department of Health just the day before yesterday and raised this as an issue. But they're saying the problem is the amount of social workers that are under pressure right across the board. They couldn't ask to make prospective childminders a priority.
But would it be right in saying that actually through this model of an academy, actually rather than a bit meal approach by social workers and registered childminders and those process coming up a bit meal, by an academy we have the potential to actually speed the process up because we're getting on block applications. So if you're going out with an academy, I suppose, is it a call every period? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
So our development engagement officers will be out at different events.
Okay.
And so they will go to an event and they will have leaflets and cards that they would give out to encourage people to come forward and take them through the process.
Okay. No, thank you, Chair.
No,
I think
that's
very
fine. And
important.
just before I go to Mike, just in terms of recruitment, but in terms of retention, the particular challenge is, so why are people leaving the sector? Could you just talk us through in terms of particularly those
So I
that
think
you work with?
I think there's a couple of issues. Sometimes women come into childminding because they have a child of their own, and so therefore they want to still work and have an income. So they become a registered childminder. But then when that child goes to post-primary, then they decide to enter back into the workforce. What I'm trying to do is to give them training during that time that they're with us, so that at least they'll move to another part of the sector. So they may go to a daycare setting, or they may go to a classroom assistant, or they may go somewhere else, but we keep that expertise within the sector. The other issue is, it's interesting that our childminders are an ageing population because, and we've only addressed it recently, they never had a pension. A lot of them are working into their 70s. And so then all of a sudden you get a huge number. So I met a childminder the other day who's been a childminder for 43 years. She's minding 3rd generation children. She wanted to retire, and one of them said to her, please don't retire, I'm having a baby, just give me 2 years. And she decided to stay on. You know, so there's that in it as well. So they're an ageing population, and it's trying to get that younger generation in so that we can keep that service going. And I think particularly for approved home childcares, there's a great potential with regard to supporting families with children with additional needs. And it's much easier for a child in its own home where it's more comfortable and its own surroundings for an approved home childcare then to mind the child, and it can mind the other children as well. So it makes it much easier, you know.
Thank you for that. Mike?
Chair, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Appreciate your engagement with the committee. As we await the programme for government, I have a written answer from the Executive Office from the 2nd of May, which says the Executive are agreed on 7 priorities. Childcare is the first one mentioned, and it's not in alphabetical order, so you might assume it is of the 7 number 1, which is encouraging.
Absolutely.
Obviously, the impacts are potentially, in one sense, on helping the child have the best start in life, but also, as you've said, Patricia, economic benefits. So have you any data on the correlation between economic inactivity and the lack of accessible, affordable childcare?
Employers for Childcare will have done some of that research. We in particular haven't. All we have is anecdotal evidence to know that when a child has been to a childminder, when it goes to the nursery or the school, they can tell right away because of the child's social development, on its caring, its sharing, its empathy. We've even recently been talking to schools where children don't know how to turn a page in a book but can flick through an iPad or a you know what I mean? So, and one of the big issues for our childminders coming through from COVID was the issue of communication. So I was able to apply for a small pot of money to train our childminders in Makaton. And we work very closely with the Royal College of Speech and Language as well. So they're very quick to pick up on issues with children and to be able to then have those difficult conversations very often with parents. I think there is an issue with regard to some of the areas that we would have childminders where there is a bigger number of parents looking childcare but can't find it. And so therefore then that happens, we find this unregistered childminders opening up. So the biggest thing for me there in an unregistered childminder is that there's child protection, because no one in that family has been vetted. Never mind the fact that they may not be have any legal or liability insurance. So there's a number of issues that would concern me, but we don't have any particular research.
You've taken me to my second question, which is we kind of focus, I think, primarily on the affordability or lack of affordability of childcare, but accessibility is also key.
Absolutely.
So have you any anecdotal thoughts on the balance between the two?
Well, anecdotal evidence is that we need to get more childminders in particular areas. So I would say places like West Belfast and East Belfast, and particularly when you mention social workers are involved, people get a bit apprehensive and say, well, I don't want anybody about my house. And that's something that I've had the conversation with the department where we need to look at. Do social workers need to do the inspections? Do they need to do, our childminders are inspected on an annual basis. Do they really need to be when they've been here for 30 years and never had a strong recommendation on any of their inspections? So there's lots of things that need to be looked at, and of course that's the Department of Health. But I do think that that's where my development engagement officers come in. They try their hardest at areas where there are gaps to try to create childminders, but it is difficult in rural areas because of the distance. And what we've found also recently is that if you live in a rural area and you take your child to a local childminder, there's more opportunity for that child to go to the local school. Whereas if the parent takes it to the nearest town, to a childcare or daycare facility, then there's more chance they'll go to the school in the town. So it also will help, I suppose, rural schools and making sure that they keep their numbers up. And that's something that we hadn't recognised before, I think, as well.
Some years ago, childminding was under what was the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. And I think it's fair to characterise the committee at the time getting very frustrated. There was a ring-fence pot of money for childcare, and it wasn't released. And my understanding was the difficulty was there was no agreement in the department about giving money to private sector childminding work companies. And the debate was, should they be forced to set up a social enterprise wing?
Well, I mean, as you know, Mike, I was there in those days and made the argument. The issue was no department wanted to take responsibility because they didn't want to be left the bill. So that's why it's important for us that this is an executive project and that the money is made available, even though the Department of Education is taking the lead on the childcare strategy. Then I think there's a responsibility on all departments to be able to weigh in behind that to make sure that the money goes and is ring fenced. My worry at the minute is 57 million is the rate across that we're getting from England at the services that they're delivering over there. But that's a drop in the ocean when we look at the 400 million that they need to just put in the 22.5 free hours. Now, you could get me started on another one there. In other jurisdictions, the money follows the child.
Yes.
And so you can divide it between education and care. So in other jurisdictions, you could send a child to 12.5 free hours and then use the other 10 hours to pay your childminder or your daycare provision. So, but in Northern Ireland, because of the way that it's set up, the money automatically goes to EA. And so the huge amount of money that's needed for childcare at the minute will go into infrastructure. Because when you look at your small playgroups and others that have a morning session and an afternoon session, they don't have the infrastructure to create then 2 separate classes for 22.5 hours. But it's not just the physical infrastructure, it's the staff, it's the catering staff, the cleaners, the meals, all of that has to be taken into consideration, and that's where the huge costs come into.
Just finally, if I may, I'm not sure if this is a practical thought, but there are clearly people who are economically inactive because they can't access affordable childcare.
Yeah.
Could we not train them up to be childminders?
Good. Of course you could.
And you get a win-win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
But sorry, also I think what you have to look at is and we've worked with the job centres actually, they have come forward as well in Lurgan and Portadown direction, and they're saying, can we give some of these people taster sessions first so that we give them the confidence that they feel that they could look after children. So we're looking at some innovative projects which I think are very good.
Good, thanks for that. Sinead?
Thank you, Patricia and Andrea, for your answer so far. I submitted a question recently to the Economy Minister regarding their engagement with the task and finishing force, and to date they haven't submitted any papers to that for the task and finish force. What would your recommendations be for the Minister in contributing to that task and finish force? What would your asks
be? Well, my issue is I don't know what that task and finish group is doing. And my understanding is they're looking at how they can spend the first 25 million, I think. So I don't know what their priorities are in that. Is it going back to that whole issue of the 22.5 free hours? And are they looking at spending that money on infrastructure, at trying to be able to create that? I also think that parents need to understand that the 22.5 free hours is only for 3 to 4 year olds.
Yeah.
I think there were some parents who've just had babies said, great, once my baby's ready to go to childcare, I'm going to get 22.5 free hours. And I'm going, no, not till they're 3 or 4. And so I think and even though in England, when they're talking about now lowering that down to babies from 9 months, we have no process here in order to be able to do that at this stage. So I would think that if we ever get to that stage, it'll be way down the track.
And just on that subject now about the 22.5 hours, you did mention in your briefing, that it would be detrimental to childminders, but can you expand a wee bit on that?
That means if you're a parent and you have a 3 to 4 year old, you're going to get the 22.5 free hours somewhere else. You're not going to bring them to a childminder then. So childminders are going to lose a lot of 3 to 4 year olds. We've got the review of the minimum standards that's coming out soon, and we're arguing because our evidence in our surveys tell us that while we can up the ratios, the majority of childminders would prefer to have, so at the minute they can have 3 children under school age and 3 children over school age. They would like 4 children under school age and 2 over school age because the demand's there. Parents are saying, if I'm working from home, I can cope with my son or daughter for a couple of hours after school, but I can't cope and work with a toddler all day. Mm-hmm. So we need to look at how we can change that, and that's some of the stuff that we will be raising when it comes to the minimum standards. Yeah. So, and that, as I said to you, is some of the evidence that's coming through from our childminders, that there's a bigger demand for younger children, but they will lose out then when it comes to 3 or 4 year olds.
I think all of us representatives here, get that particular piece told us quite often. I was in Dunstores on Saturday and I had a woman approach me again about the ratios, and she was a childminder, and she is really concerned because she's splitting families up, because the children are going to two different childminders, and the pressure that the parents are under because of that. So the review of minimum standards has been delayed and delayed and delayed, and it's really having an impact, particularly on childminders. So whilst that's the Department of Health, it is having an impact on the economy as well. So, you know, from a committee's perspective, it's something that we probably should be encouraging the Minister to, you know, bring forward that review as soon as possible, and particularly around the ratios, to make them more realistic for families and for childminders to be more sustainable. So the other piece that I want you to talk about now is maybe training for the childminders. You know, the stability of core funding for that training going forward, because childminders need to feel that it's a career and that it's a valued career as well. So can you talk a wee bit about what would be the ideal situation around funding for training?
So we get funding to deliver the mandatory training, but the childcare partnerships have a budget of 250,000 a year to deliver training. So they deliver all kinds of training on free. The problem is that we don't use that word free anymore. We say it's fully funded, because people think when it's free they don't make the same commitment. So what happens is then we have childminders. So childminders have to do refresher training every 3 years. We deliver that, but if you're getting it fully funded off the childcare partnership, you're not going to come to ours. But the problem is that then if they find out 2 days before there's only 3 people turning up, to cancel it. And then we have an influx of people coming to us saying, look, I need this because my time limit's nearly up. But through our surveys, we found that we need different types of training. So Makaton was one of them. And the only place that I could get any funding for that was through Nationwide. £5,000, 50 childminders through Makaton training. Some of them have gone on to do their second level. We got money from Halifax to deliver with MenCap specific training on special educational needs. But I have to keep going out and trying to find funding for that, and identifying where I can get pots of money to be able to train our childminders, and then listening to what their needs are is important. And, you know, we go back to, they've been affected by the cost of living. Our childminders that paid £200 for the car insurance are now paying £600. Where they would have fed children in their settings, they're now saying to parents, I'm sorry, you'll have to bring food for them. I can't afford it. Their electricity has gone up like everybody's, and their heating, and they have no option. They can't turn it off for a few hours during the day because they have to keep a certain temperature in the house. And so therefore they have to pay that money out, and so they have seen that as a difficult period for them. And that's again why some of them have stopped childminding, because it's been cheaper for them to go out and get a job somewhere else.
Can I ask another question? Obviously, that you've seen the decline in numbers of registered childminders over a span of years. Do you think that there are more unregistered childminders, and that might be one of the reasons for the decline? And how concerning is that?
Well, we would be concerned. The problem is we don't know the quantity, because we don't know how many are out there. And Sinead, you yourself put a question into the Western Trust and asked how many people had been investigated for unregistered childminding, and there was 8. 2 then became, because the option is you stop childminding or you become registered. So 2 became registered, 4 didn't fit the criteria, 1 they couldn't find, and 1 they were still investigating. So the criteria is that if I go to your door and you have children in your house and I say to you, you childmind, and you go, no, that's my sister's children and I don't get paid for that, nobody bothers to follow that up. Or, oh no, they're my neighbour's children, I'm minding them because they're away to a funeral, nobody follows it up. So there needs to be I've asked for a task force to be set up, a time-bound task force to go in and to have the power to wait on the parents and to find out if these children are being minded or not. But there is no deterrent. If you're a daycare and you open up tomorrow and you're not registered, you're taken to court and fined. I think it's £5,000. But so we need that kind of a deterrent for someone who's found to be an unregistered childminder, because it's child protection here, and it's the safety of these children. And I understand it's difficult for parents, because if they can't get it registered, they're going to take anybody. But I think it's important that we do that piece of exercise also with parents, to let them know how difficult and how important it is that they make sure that their children are safe. So I do think it's an issue, and I've asked for a time-bound task force to deal with this issue, so that we can at least get those people either back into the sector or not be childminding at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. David?
Shanice just read my notes, I think, and I was sharing them, so I was going to But listen, thanks for coming, and really appreciate the what you do, actually, as well as coming in and seeing. I was reading through, and I made a load of notes. It's Shanice read out, but and I suppose the bit for me, and I have a preschool, a nursery in our area that we've been dealing with, and one of the issues for their numbers are dropping. The numbers are dropping because there isn't enough childcare in the area. In a rural area in Ballinderry, and because there's not enough childcare, they can't actually get to the schools. So that it's an issue not only in the towns but in those rural areas. So it is something that we need to help with. I suppose the other part of it is not viewing it as babysitting, but as a child development, and that's a different game. Whenever Johnny was asking there about the academy and stuff, just to pick a little bit on that, where if you're trying to attract somebody into a new into a new job, into a new industry, if you like, a new career path, part of that is skills and part of that is training, and part of that, what does that academy model actually look like? Where does somebody go to do what are the time scales? What does that actually involve somebody to attract somebody in?
Okay, so when we would promote the academies, we would say the first point of contact is to go to your trust to declare your interest that you would like to become, and then they automatically pass you to us. Okay. And so then our development officer for that area would then engage with that person and take them through the process. So they hold their hand the whole time.
But if that's in the west, you were talking about our Middle East Antrim. So if you're outside of that area, what happens?
Well, we will go to the different academies, or we'll go to the different events. The problem is the academy allows us, when we engage with that person, to say, if you stick with this is what we will give you. Okay. We can give you the starter kit, the startup grant. We can give you your membership to NICMA, which includes your public liability. We can give you the extra training. So while we give them the mandatory training, which we're funded for, we give them business training, and we give them special educational needs training, or maybe Macatron training, whichever they prefer. But also, there's do we give them anything else? But the important part is that we hold their hand, so we make sure that they have all their paperwork in for social services. We
get them ready for inspection as well, because that's a daunting experience for them. So we can go out to their homes, make sure that their baby locks are on all the drawers that should be on it, and stair gates up, and explain to them, this is what needs to be done. Make sure that cord blinds are tied up, everything, to put them at ease. So I think that's a big one for them.
What's the time? Is the delay is the
delay is the registration, because you have to be assigned a social worker. She's got to go do all the paperwork end of it, all the vetting, all the background checks, and then you need to get a letter from your GP. That has been an issue recently, because GPs are refusing. They're saying they have enough work to do. They're not, and in some cases they're charging people £100. Now, we've had this conversation with the department as well. We would recommend that you still do that GP check for registered childminders and approved home childcares, because they are lone workers and you need that protection. But then they need to give a directive to the GPs that they need to be delivering these letters in the first place. Now, up until recently, we didn't have much problem with it. But we've had 2 cases recently in one of the trusts where the GP is just absolutely refusing. So that means that person can't go through. That means we've lost them. So we're asking them to become approved home childcare, because that process is much shorter. Yeah. So you have to be over 18. You have to have your mandatory training or qualification. You have to have your full paediatric first aid, and you have to be vetted. And then you can be registered, and that you can be registered within 2 months.
Okay.
So that's a much quicker process than it is, because it's your house that you're registering. So the house has to be inspected, and maybe there has to be a second, and then it has to go to panel, and they have to agree. So.
And everybody in the home has to be vetted, and then go down to the early years team. The whole family together has to go down to prove who they are and that they have been vetted. So.
And then the future development of a childminder, so if somebody's upskilling, if you like, through your Magatons, that's brilliant, doing it, and having that. But how does that fit? So is that over a period of time? It doesn't all happen before you start. It's like
we do get it all done.
We get it all done
registration.
before, yeah.
Yeah, but is there continual development? That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So
yes.
after that, there is an opportunity. So all I'm getting at, I'm trying to think in my head. If I'm Joe, when you're reading the sort of salary levels, if you like, you're competing against the Tesco, Sainsbury's, and everybody else with no pressures.
Yeah.
So is that bit of, is there future development to allow
Absolutely.
career progression, that there is a.
As a NICMA
Yeah.
member, they will be offered training throughout
Yeah.
the whole year. So any bit of funding we get will go out to our members first before anybody else. So the SEN training pathways we get, so we do a lot of funding through pathways as well. So they'll be offered training throughout the whole year, as well as their support in anything that they require.
But we would also tap into other organisations that have funding to deliver training. So for instance, another big one there recently was diabetes, and children having to receive insulin.
Yeah.
And some childminders were wary of that. So after they did the training, then they felt a bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's also about tapping into what else is out there. So it's not always about trying to draw down funding.
Yeah.
And just it's finally for me, and Sinead picking this at the end, sort of the unregistered childcare that's out there. And I think you said about the fine, but what would you like to see? What sort of deterrent? I think you said about a fine, but is that the deterrent? Where does that?
That would come in the legislation. There'd have to be a change in the legislation for that.
And how would that actually on the ground happen? How would that? So
Well, your task force would then be able to enforce that.
Okay.
If you were able to prove that someone was actually minding children and being paid for it. And another issue that I don't think people understand, we would get a phone call from a parent saying, I've just been told by my childminder I have to pay her in cash. And we're going, well, first of all, that says to us that's somebody who's unregistered. But is that somebody who's on benefit? And minding and taking an income. So that parent actually is helping that individual commit fraud. And I think that's, something else that we haven't thought about. But it's certainly, and I know there are people out there who genuinely mind families' children or whatever, and they don't get paid anywhere near, and in some cases they don't get paid at all, and that's fine. But it's proven, you have to be able to prove that. And if you have a parent coming up to pick a child at 5 o'clock, and it's actually paying that person to mind that child, then that needs to be reported, particularly if that person is not registered. And again, parents may not realise that childminders should be registered, so they may not ask for the certificate of registration when they're going to bring their children to them in the first place. So there's a huge piece of work, but I do think there's an issue there around a task force being able to follow through with some of that, where some of our social workers they don't have the time. And so they take that
Thanks,
easy
Neil.
answer. Sorry.
Padraig. No, you're fine. Just
Thank you, and thank you both for your presentation. It's been really useful, and it's kind of, I suppose, highlighted to me a few of the things that I'd read through in the report and wasn't quite sure about. So it's really good, and for me that just highlights the detail of actually listening to people who are working in this field. Highlights the professionalism that's within the field as well. And I think one of the things that I noted on the RAISE report was that there's no agreed definition of childcare, and that's why sometimes the comparative models between here and other jurisdictions, other countries can be quite difficult. So it's more just to make the point that it really underlines again how useful it is to hear from yourselves and actually to get that understanding. I was looking around the Skill Up programme in particular. So obviously you've highlighted some of the ways that the people come in to childcare in particular and in the working in that sphere. The Skill Up programme, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there was no provision there for people to undertake those courses. That concerns me, because one of the things that the Skill Up, I suppose, is really targeted at identifying skills gaps and how we can encourage people to either migrate from another place of work or to actually take up work and I suppose become involved in that field. So the fact that there's no childcare provision model route within the Skill Up programme, I think something that hopefully as a committee we can maybe identify and work on, because there's clearly a skills gap here. And just on that point, I'm keen to hear from you. I mean, what engagement have you had in the last 4 or 5 plus years with the department around this? Because it just, I mean, I looked through the Skill Up programmes and they're fantastic. It's a really, really positive programme. But I am a wee bit baffled at how childcare hasn't been included within that.
Well, to answer your last question first, no engagement. Very often things happen and nobody ever comes to us to ask, and maybe it's a two-way process. I suppose over the last 7 years when I've been in this post, I have tried to raise the profile of childminders from being people assuming that they're glorified babysitters and they're only in it for the pin money, to actually they're professional childcare givers and this is a business to them. And it's taken a long time to be able to do that, but we've done it. I also recently have come to the conclusion that we're lumped in with childcare, and so everybody thinks that's daycare settings and after schools or whatever. We're not, we're separate, we're childminders, we're, as I call, sole traders in many cases, and I think that's important. In our academies, and really they should be childcare, they're childminding academies, they're not childcare academies, because there are other organisations running childcare academies and all they're doing is giving people taster sessions and pointing them in the direction of the colleges to do their level 2 or level 3 in child development. So childminding academies are something totally different. And I think that in the academies we talk about the unemployed or those that want to be re-employed, but we talk about skilling up and reskilling people. So we've tried to cover all bases so that it's not just unemployed people that we would target, but maybe somebody who wants to change career or somebody who's been out of the workforce for a while, and to be able to give them those skills. But I certainly would be happy enough to look at the Skill Up programmes and help the department in any way that we can to look at that.
I think it's an opportunity, and I mean what we've already identified here today is that there's opportunity to create more pathways. So I think it's something that we should definitely look at. Just when you're talking about people who are moving into childminding from other careers versus people who are unemployed, do you have any kind of breakdown of that data in terms of how many people are moving from different parts? Are there particular sectors which you find attract more people in? Because I'm just thinking in terms of us being really specific and targeted in how we encourage more people to move into childminding.
It's not a data that we have collected, but we have
through the academies. We will
Yeah.
find out which ones are unemployed, upskilling or reskilling. So we will address it through the academies, but that's, as Patricia said, only been done over the past 4 years with a small group of people. So yes, but it's something we can look into going forward.
I'm happy to share.
Even our childminders, if we go out with a survey, within a week there 400 or 500 people are coming back to you with a reply, so we can get the information for
we
you.
get a good result.
Yeah, I'm thinking, because it goes back to the point that was made initially around local government and the role local government have to play, because there's probably, I suppose, broader trends, but there's probably stuff that's specific to each council area, and even within that as well. In certain sectors, like I'm even thinking of my own council area in Derry and Strabane, there's definitely people who are here and would love to take up those opportunities, and it's creating those pathways for them to do it. So I think what you're doing is fantastic, and it's a real opportunity for people.
I was down at Oma Council. I'm not sure which one they're. Is it Fermanagh Oma Council now? It's not long since I've been here, but anyway. And I was down a while ago with them, and they're doing an amazing piece of work through their community section of the council, and they're actually mapping out where all the provision is and where the gaps are, and also how many people are unemployed in those areas. And is there that issue, as you said, Mike, can we encourage some of those people that are unemployed to actually become childminders? You know, the hope was that if you had 8 women who would like to go out to work, one of them would actually become the childminder that would mind the other, you know, or 6 or whatever it is. So from that perspective, I think there is the opportunity. So they're doing a very good piece of work, and it will be interesting to see what the outcome of that is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Saoirse?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, lovely to see you. How are you? Yeah, I mean, listen, thank you so much for being here today. What's really coming through, I suppose, in terms of the questions that you're getting is basically there's a lot of knowledge still to be learnt from policy and decision makers in terms of what is that you guys do and the critical role you play. One of the things that I'm really interested to understand is you've talked a lot about the LMPs, the labour market partnerships. Obviously, they're sitting within DFC, and we're clearly trying to look at things from an economic planning perspective. A lot of the issues that you've said today and evidenced in terms of, and Sinead and I will know this from our all-party group and skills, is the issues around access NI, safeguarding, insurance for people travelling in a car if they have to do a pick-up and drop-off or whatever. Some of the stuff around unregistered childminders, the involvement of DOH, the involvement of social care, and all the knock-on impacts that those departments are having that then basically comes down the line to use. It's my strong belief that we need more cross-departmental working. And to be honest, the more I sit in this chair in this building, if it's committee or the chamber, you know, honestly, the lack of cross-departmental will be the death of us, because, you know, we cannot look at this through one lens. And for me, the biggest thing that I think we have to face is the fact that everybody's alluded to it already. This is critical development of children. It isn't, as you say, somebody getting pin money. I'm sure there's people in this room don't even know what that means, but, you know, it's that element of professionalisation. I think we need to have somebody calling it, whether it's a minister or whoever, and talking about priority job sectors. And I definitely think that this is one of those areas, whether it's childminding, whether it's childcare, early years, whatever. For me, I think there needs to be, and I know you're keen not to get lumped in, Patricia, and I totally appreciate that, but I think there does need to be some sort of conglomeration of basically people coming together to say, like, this is who we are, this is a united early years professionalisation development. And you've talked about the colleges, and sometimes that does work for you, other times it's maybe working against you a wee bit. How do you see that path to professionalisation of the sector and a prioritisation of the sector in terms of economic planning being reached?
I just think, first of all, it's the recognition of the contribution that our childminders make and the difficulties that they face at times. I do think that as the only organisation in Northern Ireland, I'm struggling this year in a deficit because I've lost my core grant. I mean, I can bring in my money for my development officers, I can bring money in for training, I can bring money, but if there's nobody in the middle to manage all that, how is it going to survive? So I think funding for organisations, and considering that we're the only one, there's nobody else can do it. And I've had this conversation with some of the councils, and I know we've been down these routes before about single tender action. But if we're the only people that can do it, and we're the only people that work directly with the trust to engage with these people, then why are we giving that money to colleges or to another organisation who just after COVID took it on and then couldn't deliver and handed it back? And now we're in negotiation with Belfast City Council to create this academy where we couldn't get them to listen at the time. So it's for me, that's the first thing. It's a recognising the professionalism of childminders and approved home childcares, and secondly funding the sector to make sure that we're there to be able to support those people through whatever it is that they need supported through. And also, I think you're right, it's that cross-departmental working. I mean, the Department of Education had no understanding or knowledge that the fact that the Department of Communities had labour market partnerships and they were creating academies. So there needs to be that wider conversation. And, this is a task and finish group. So what happens after that? Does everybody go back into their departments and nobody talks about childcare again? So, I think there needs to be some constant communication between the departments of here's where we are, here's where we need to move to, here's where your responsibility is, here's where you could be adding to that and contributing and giving the value added. And of course, the one that everybody thinks shouldn't be involved is the Department of Finance. So Department of Finance should be checking budgets to see how much is spent on or how much has been put towards childcare. So I do think that there's a number, because it's the Department of Education who's leading on the strategy, but it's the other departments that will deliver, if you like, for want of a better word.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. In terms of the skills strategy from Department for Economy, have you engaged with that at all in any? No. You see, this is an issue for me where, we do need cross-departmental working, but I also think we need to have priority sectors recognised, and we're trying to do that through the job of work and engaging with areas such as health and social care, such as these sorts of roles, which are absolutely critical economic and social infrastructure. They're not kind of part-time hobby jobs. This is really serious stuff that does impact. We know actually as well that if you have a child with special educational needs, they are almost twice as likely to be in a situation where they have no childcare. And that's really, really concerning, especially whenever we look at the issue of respite and the lack of respite that we have too. So for me, there's a conversation around, yes, freeing up people who would be part of the workforce to either re-enter or reskill. But I also want to make sure that it's done in a way where it is robust in terms of safeguarding. Do you have any views on special educational needs and how those families with children are coping?
Well, that's why we're trying to build up the approved home childcares, because we think that's where that would help fill that gap. Speaking to the department the other day, they're very interested in it. But again, it's by coincidence. So going to the department and eventually getting the meeting, then you're having the conversation about approved home childcares, and they're saying, oh, you need to speak to such and such and such and such, and they can take the money out of such and such. And I'm thinking, well, that's all good and fine, but how quickly can that be done? But the issue is that for parents with the children with additional needs, I have seen, we met the Melta parents. One of them had a child who went to Fleming Fulton, and she had to pay a classroom assistant £14.50 an hour during the summer to mind her child, while her other child went to a childcare provider. Now, if she can't claim her tax credits because that classroom assistant's not registered, but if she had an approved home childcare that could mind both children and she could claim her tax credits because that person's registered, it would make life much easier. And that's only a small part. We know from the Department of Education that Northern Ireland has the lowest uptake of child tax credits, and it's through childcare that it's not taken up. And that again points to unregistered childminders, because you have to be registered in order to be able to get your tax credits.
Just finally, in terms of issues around safeguarding, David had asked the same question as well. What do you think the risk is at this point in time with the number of unregistered childcare providers?
Again, we don't know the quantity, we only hear. I mean, Andrea was visiting a friend one day and she said there's only 4 or 5 childminders in this area, and she said, you're joking, there's about 20 odds. So that again tells you there's 15 or 16 people who are unregistered. And those particular areas need to be targeted, and we're saying, can you give us the names? The other thing is, when childminders were reporting unregistered childminders, social services were then telling the unregistered childminders who reported them, and so some of them had cars damaged, windows put in, so they're afraid of that. So I've said, send me the name and I'll send it to the trust. I have no qualms about that. So that's why I'm saying, if a task force was set up, it would make things much easier for everyone once they're reported.
Okay, thank you. It's really important issue, so appreciate you coming in, and we've covered an awful lot of issues, most of which I wanted to ask about have been dealt with, but you did allude about maybe specific issues in rural areas. And I think David kind of touched on an example. So, first of all, I should have said, as North Antrim MLA, I'm glad to hear there's good engagement and good working on Mid and East Antrim Council. In terms of the rural thing, over and above the general issues that you encounter everywhere, what are the specific issues impacting provision in rural areas? And you actually talked about something that follows on in terms of schools, which I didn't even think about, where children or parents probably send children to their school following the location of their childmind. So is there, as well as the issues affecting that, is there any other examples of kind of unintended consequences from a rural perspective through lack of childminding?
I think it's really distance. So, if your family here and your childminder's over there, it's factoring in all that amount of time that you would need to get to there, to drop them off, and then getting back home again to pick them up. And so therefore you probably in an area, in an urban area where you could have 10 childminders, you might only have 4 in a rural area, and that's what I think makes a difference. The other issue is that when you bring on an assistant, then you're allowed 1 to 8, and there's a whole issue with planning then. We've had childminders that have had to spend £1,500 just to be able to employ an assistant to have another extra 2 children. So again, that's something that needs to be dealt with in the ratios, which would help in rural areas. So somebody in a rural area, it doesn't matter if there's an extra car coming to the door, but very often, as Sinead said, it's a second child. So it's the same car, so why does it matter? But it's because of the planning regulations that once you go over 6, you have to have this planning permission.
Good job, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And look, thank you very much for your presentation. It's undoubtedly that childcare and childminding is really the issue of our day, to be honest with you. The pressures that parents are facing now are not the same that they faced 20 and 30 years ago. And unfortunately, government has not kept pace with the huge pressure and demands that there is in the sphere of childcare and childminding. So it's a really timely intervention. As Mike has said, it is up there in lights as the number 1 priority for government to deal with. And whilst I welcome that there is progress now, would seem underway, we are all fully aware that yes, there will be finance allocated to this to try to alleviate the pressures that parents are facing financially. But if we're being honest, there's other pressures. It's not going to be enough, and I think that's recognised across the board. So and I know, having spoke to the Minister of Education, this is something that is a real burning issue for him, and will do what he can immediately to try and ensure that we get some relief to parents to enable them to access childcare, childminding, but also enable them to continue in the workplace. A big issue that's coming to my constituency of us, and I'm sure it's the same with other members, is parents that are weighing up work or stay at home with their kids. They're essentially working to pay for childcare costs. It doesn't make sense at all, and that's hugely regrettable, because for a lot of them, particularly young professional women that have worked hard, skilled themselves in their specific sector, and essentially having to let it all go because they can't afford childcare. So for us to get this right, it's so important. The rural availability is something that I think really we haven't touched on too much as an assembly, because whilst there is pressures on accessing childminders and childcare facilities in towns, it is much more acute in rural communities. And I would like to know probably how we can look at a structure, particularly through the councils. I think the Skills Academy really runs we increase the chances of trying to reach out into those harder communities in rural settings to ensure that they can come on board. And finally, if you could touch on this point, what has been the engagement with the private sector? So Mike touched on a very good point. Economically inactive, is that a target market that we're going to try and increase those that want to get involved in childminding and get registered? How do we target a campaign to get them in? Number 1. Number 2, if employers know that they run the potential of losing these hugely qualified, capable young women to childcare costs and childminding, what contribution or what efforts are being made by the private sector to try and ensure that they can help ameliorate these concerns and ensure that these ladies stay within the sector? That's just my thoughts.
Okay. Can I? Your rural childcare was an issue many years ago when the Assembly was here. We had a rural childcare strategy, and it was funded, and it was successful, and then it was cancelled. So Michelle Gildern, who was the minister at the time, and she brought it in, and it was one of the most successful strategies. So that helped and supported parents in accessing rural childcare, and then it was scrapped.
And funded by the Department of Agriculture at that
Yep,
time?
at that time.
Okay.
You talk about the private sector. Many years ago when I was in this assembly, I started the childcare for assembly members. That has been scrapped. So when you ask a private sector person to look at how it supports their employees, they say, well, who can I benchmark against? When this government doesn't even have a childcare fund for its own MLAs, or at that stage was the Secretariat. So I got, when I was here, £15 a week for my daughter who was over 3. If they were under 3, you got £30 a week. But that was taxed. So I got £10 a week towards my childcare, but it was a start. So if you went to an employer and say, well, I benchmark against the Assembly, they would say, well, I could give them an extra £15 a week, and then I can tick the box and I'm doing my bit for childcare. So it's about engaging with the private sector so that we can say to them, this is your value for money when you invest in this. A lot of them have family-friendly practices, but they don't actually give support. And of course, the childcare vouchers was one way of doing that, because not just did the employee save, but the employer saved. And then now they've brought in the tax credits. So I do think there's ways that we need to look on how we can get employers to invest in childcare for their employees.
Is there any industry leaders in the private sector on this point?
None.
Not that
None
comes
that
to
I'm
mind.
aware of.
Okay,
No.
no, that's an interesting, because I think that's a part of the piece that's missing. Government can only do so much.
Yes.
We know the financial
Absolutely.
pressures that it faces. We have to be realistic.
Yeah.
But I think there is a lot more can be done with private sector engagement on this issue, and it's to their benefit. It's in their interest to ensure that they can retain a highly skilled workforce. And the economically inactive statistics are not good in Northern Ireland. And I would love to see how we can target those communities, whether that's, you talk about in interaction with Jobs and Benefits Office locally, that's interesting. Is there other ways that we can target those to get them into the sector?
I would be interested, it might be something that you can ask the Minister. 20 years ago, I sat on the Enterprise Trade and Investment Committee, and the Minister was giving us the unemployment figures at that time, but he reckoned that there was 6,000 women who didn't claim any kind of a benefit that were unemployed, and their biggest obstacle to employment was childcare.
I wouldn't doubt that. It's probably got far worse. Finally, from me, look, I want to recognise the hard work that childminders and caregivers give right across the board. You know, they're quite often a go-to and a point of consideration in terms of family setups. They take in a lot of information that perhaps sometimes are missing from struggling parents. I would just say that there is an unlevel playing field, given what we know that there is a lot of unregistered childminders in the community. Hard to identify, hard to deal with, but they're there. And I would just say that I think probably the task force is an interesting concept, but the first point should be to try and encourage
Absolutely.
those that are unregistered to become registered before we go down the hard line of enforcement, because given where the numbers are, we essentially need those unregistered minders to become registered.
Absolutely.
So it's just a point of...
Absolutely, and you will find that probably the majority of them have been registered, but because of COVID and everything that happened there, where they couldn't work, they didn't get any support, unlike the daycares that got be able to furlough the staff and everything else, a lot of them decided to go unregistered, because at that stage key workers were people who worked in the emergency services and hospitals, but you still needed people who worked in the supermarkets and to deliver food and to do all of that, and they weren't seen as key workers, but they still had to get to work. So therefore I think that's where the growth of unregistered childminders actually happened.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well,
So
thank
just
you.
as we draw to a close, there's two members indicated just in terms of quick points, if you don't mind, and then Sinead and then Mike, if that's okay.
It's just really on where Johnny was going with that as well. And I think that there are some low-hanging fruit in terms of getting people into the sector. So we got evidence at the APG from the FE colleges to say that those that were doing their level 2, level 3 skills, childcare development, and that they were only getting workplaces experience or work experience in the school sector. They were only coming out to go into the school sector as classroom assistants. So eventually, whenever they had their qualifications, that was the sector that they went in to work in, because that was their experience. So the childcare sector, in terms of childminders, daycare, etc., weren't getting fed these workplace experience and these new students. And I think that that's low hanging fruit, that we should be able to open up access to the entire childcare sector from our FE colleges, and there is a problem there.
Well, we did. I argued when I came into this job that there should be placements with childminders.
Yes.
The problem there is that we got over the hump with regard to the public liability insurance, but they were expecting then childminders to take on employers' liability insurance. And why would you? They're not employing them. They're in a voluntary capacity and they're only there for a certain amount of time. Now the department is looking at that. But also, if you have you cannot enter into the childcare sector until you're 18. But if you're still living at home at 19 or 20, your mother might not want you to be a registered childminder. But they're the people that we would like to encourage to become approved home childcarers, because they can work in somebody else's home.
It's nearly what Jonathan was saying, where's the pipeline? Yeah. But we're kind of closing the pipeline off by not giving them that experience within the sector itself. So I think it's something that could be looked at and lift some of the barriers.
Yep.
Mike, briefly.
Have you any idea how long a GP should take to research and write that £100 letter?
Probably a few minutes, because I'm sure he maybe hasn't seen that person in years, and he's simply looking at their medical records and saying, well, they've no mental health issues, no drug or alcohol issues, so they're fit for purpose.
I don't want to be unfair to GPs, but it sounds a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just a letter to say that this person is a fit person to work with children. Yeah. So obviously, if you've been involved in your GP, they'll know if you've had mental health issues or any other kind of issue.
So. Thank you.
Thank you, and Patricia and Andrea, obviously given the level of engagement you can see that that's something that very much interests MLA, so we genuinely want to thank you for your time. I hope that you feel that you've been given a voice today, that obviously we are concerned by what we're hearing, particularly within your sector, and there's a number of action points no doubt that we'll be following up, but I just want to encourage you obviously to keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate that you may not always feel valued, but we very much value what you do within our communities. So thank you very much, and no doubt we'll speak in the near future again. So thank you.
Thank you also for allowing us to come today and to answer some of your questions, and you have our details. If there's anything else that you need to ask, we're happy to help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Members, we're going to, thanks for that. I think it was actually a very useful session and good engagement, and everybody was quite good in terms. So we're going to hand over just to the clerk, maybe just to summarise some of the actions just of what we heard from the last presentation there.
So, Chair, again, this is where members will push back and tell me what I've missed, but I think the committee feels very strongly on the issue, wishes to write to the Department of Health, Department of Education, who are in the lead, Department for Communities and our own Department for Economy, indicating that the committee believes that childcare and the provision of a childcare offer is economically vitally important. What is also important is the provision of a wraparound offer. So you have childminders and childcare settings, etc. There's also, and in terms of that offer, it should strive to address the current gap in provision for children under 3 to 4 years. That the committee is very concerned about the considerable drop in the number of registered childminders and the low uptake of tax credits. What it would like those departments to do, because they are concerned about the limited uptake of academies by district councils, is to give that academies model more of a go. And we're also concerned about the difficulties in registration and encouraging the departments to take appropriate measures to encourage registration, particularly through the use of the academy model, and linkages with the local labour market partnerships, thank you very much, with the district councils, with a view to those labour market partnerships addressing the rural issue, the issue of rural provision. Additionally then, the committee is also calling on those, the relevant department to bring forward the review of the child to carer ratio, and to explore these other training pathway options where maybe they can exploit the synergies rather than perhaps competing between the FE colleges and NICMA, where they could kind of work together to provide these other pathway options, which would probably likely include a sustainable training budget for NICMA for those additional, cleverer, better services that they told you about. Additionally then, I guess you probably want to, I'll commission Ray's just to come back with the rural childcare strategy. Mm-hmm. Maybe these problems have been solved before. And also to write to NICMA seeking more information on their innovative labour market partnership projects and a bit more about the academy model.
Yeah, Saoirse?
Could I also suggest that we understand with the department about the role of the officials on the task and finish group, who they are, what they're doing, what the input's been, just to kind of get a feel for what that is.
Yeah.
So sorry, this is the task and finish group, which is this is about the childcare task and finish group?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Thanks. Okay, will do. So terms of reference, what they're all doing. Okay, and timescales and stuff, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sinead?
I was more or less going to repeat what Saoirse said there, and just even ask the department what has their engagement been to date with that, and are they intending to submit any papers to that task and finish group?
Sorry, is the department?
This department, economy.
Aren't they represented on the task and finish group? I thought they.
Well, was my understanding that
There's
the
two
minute
officials from DFE.
Okay, so they're on it. Okay,
Yeah.
so you want to know what they've been up to and what the
Put forward.
Okay,
Good
good
stuff.
what have we
good
put
stuff,
forward?
Yeah, no, I think it's
Great.
useful, Johnny.
Yeah, 2 points. You might have mentioned this. One, it may not be, members might not see it as beneficial, but I think it might be. I can't quite understand why other councils don't want to take up this model, because I actually think it really sounds like a very promising start, particularly in Mid and East Antrim. Is it in order for us to write to the councils to encourage them to consider this or look at that? That might not be the role of the committee. I'm just trying to think about, is there a way in which we can further highlight the potential benefit? That's in one aspect. You can explain whether it is, Peter. And on the other, can we engage with the Department of Health? Because obviously one of the key challenges, because Mid-Ulster have taken this up, has been the speed at which it's being processed from the Department of Health. So we know that there's an acute issue in terms of childminders, in terms of getting into the industry. We know that the numbers have dropped. This model is seen to try to address that, but it's lagging because we're not seeing quicker processing times from the Department of Health in relation to social workers. That's two thoughts come to my mind in terms of that.
Well, thanks, John. I suppose on the academy point, I think what would be useful maybe first is to get a bit more detail from NICMA in terms of how the councils they're working with, how they're actually how they fund the academy. I suspect some councils may come back and say, well, we don't have the funding to do it. I believe they should, and we should work with them. But I think that it's actually sensible but I think it's sensible to maybe look at how you roll it out. It's clearly a success. Yeah. So I think if we can get a response from NICMA in terms of a bit more detail around how the academies are funded and how they function, then we could, I think, go. In terms of the latter point, Peter, do you have any thoughts in terms of, I think
that the plan there was to write to the Department of Health among the other departments and encourage them to make better use of the academy model, but also to address the difficulties in registration. These, there must be some clever ways, I guess, to reduce that the bureaucracy of it, but at the same time, of course, not compromising the child safety issues and all that, the good stuff.
The vetting's important. It just struck me that I think that this sort of model would make it easier for a social worker in the Department of Health to ensure that there's a full vetting process in block rather than bitmeal. Yeah. Just
okay. Members, are you content with those actions then? There's quite a number of them, yeah? Okay. Okay, members, we're going to move on now to the next item on our agenda, which is a budget briefing. There's a written briefing in your packs if you check your tabled items, and there's a clerk's revised cover note in the tabled items as well. Okay, members, so I just want to take this opportunity to welcome Joanna Park, Head of Financial Management, Management Services and Regulation Group, Niamh McGarvey is Head of In-Year Budget Management, and Susan Butler is Head of Financial Planning. Apologies, my eyesight's struggling to see the side. So thank you all very much for taking the time to come in and to brief us. Obviously, we're very much interested in what you have to say, so we're just going to maybe open with yourselves. And Joanna, taking a lead, I'm sure, in terms of the oral briefing, and then we will come back then with questions, no doubt, from members as well. So over to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair. As you've said, I'm joined by my colleagues Susan Butler and Niamh McGarvey to brief members on the Department for the Economy's budget allocation for 24-25. As outlined in my briefing paper, the Executive allocated $766.5 million non-ring-fenced resource DEL and $221.9 million capital DEL to the Department for 24-25. Turning first to the resource DEL settlement, the $766.5 million non-ring-fenced resource DEL allocation is made up of $742 million carried forward in the opening baseline, plus additional funding of $24.5 million, of which $19 million is for a general allocation, $4.1 million is additional earmarked funding for the Graduate Entry Medical School at Magee, and $1.4 million is earmarked to meet the departmental match funding requirements for Peace Plus. The $24.5 million of additional funding is some $53 million less than the £78 million of bids submitted to the Department of Finance as part of the information gathering exercise. However, it is an increase on our 23-24 position, and our Minister has pledged to work constructively within this allocation to maximise what can be delivered by the Department and its partner organisations. The budget process started under Minister Murphy and now continues under Minister Hargey is focused on delivering across the 4 priorities of our economic vision. To maximise the allocation and provide scope for slippage across programmes, changes in demand profiles and staff vacancies, the Minister has approved an opening overcommitment of £14 million. This means the budget to be allocated out to business areas and our partner organisations is £14 million higher than the funding provided by the Executive. This will be monitored closely throughout the year, but taking this decision now allows the Department and its partner organisations to plan at the start of the year rather than receive ad hoc funding during the year as other programme areas underspend. As you are aware from my paper, whilst draft allocations have been made to business areas and our partner organisations, these remain subject to a quality screening. With 16 partner organisations and 4 universities, the majority of the DFE budget flows to these organisations. The largest allocation is to our 6 FE colleges, who receive £233 million, 30% of the Department's total resource budget. Whilst this is £6 million less than the £239 million they received last year, it should be sufficient for the colleges to meet their ongoing costs due to the recurrent efficiency savings delivered to date, coupled with savings from their voluntary exit scheme. With the exception of Invest NI, the draft budget proposes increases to partnership organisations' baselines to fund the impact of the 24-25 pay and pension increases. However, when excluding one-off allocations provided in the last financial year, our partner organisations have received draft allocations broadly in line with their final allocations last year. This is obviously far from ideal as costs continue to rise. In line with the Minister's priorities, funding has been allocated to meet the current shortfall in our apprenticeship programme, support the expansion of Magee, and increase the baselines of both Tourism Ireland and Intertrade to ensure compliance with the funding ratios. Whilst we aim to maximise the allocation we have received for 24-25, unfortunately not everything could be funded. Invest NI's circa £3 million pay pressure remains unfunded. The additional funding provided to higher education student hardship last year could not be repeated in the initial allocations, and the £7.5 million gap in the higher education teaching grant created by the Secretary of State's previous budget remains. Furthermore, additional funding requested by Tourism Ireland, NI Screen and Tourism Northern Ireland to provide vital support to tourism and screen sectors could not be provided as part of draft allocations. With 12 million still to be allocated, the Minister will consider these along with proposals for a potential skills fund as part of final budget considerations. Turning to capital, the Department was allocated £221.9 million, made up of a general allocation of £204 million, £11 million earmarked for city and growth deals, £2.7 for inclusive future funds, and £4.3 earmarked for complementary funding projects. Whilst the initial budget for city and growth deals is £29 million less than the amount requested, it is anticipated the Treasury will allocate that later in the year. As outlined in my briefing paper, the draft capital allocations to business areas and arm's length bodies totals almost £233 million. This is based on the general allocation of 204 plus £16 million of capital receipts and an opening over commitment of £13 million. Therefore, with the exception of higher education, most bids are able to be funded with inside the draft allocation. Susan, Niamh and I will do our best to answer any questions you might have, but as we've just commenced the process to assess the impact of these draft allocations, we may not be able to answer all questions at this stage. Where we cannot give you precise or complete answers, we'd be happy to write to the clerk and provide the necessary explanations. Or where a question is specific to a business area, we will ask our policy colleagues to provide a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Obviously we welcome the briefing, and we're not obviously in an ideal position in terms of the budget, and we all would have been or sort of would have had a preference to dealing with this earlier, but we are where we are, and a lot of that's outside, of course, of your control. In terms of the timeline then, so you're still considering the impact of what these draft allocations. When do you see that coming to a conclusion? One of the areas I noticed in the table, there was a mention of £11.8 million in terms of proposals which are still under consideration. Mm-hmm. Could you maybe shed any light in terms of what those proposals are that are under consideration?
Yeah. So obviously I referred to the elements that have not been funded. So there is the 7.5 million for the higher education student support. Yeah. And as I outlined, Invest NI was one of the areas that was not funded for pay and price pressures. Yes. And then the Minister is considering proposals as well for additional skills allocations. So officials in the skills and education area are currently drawing up proposals for him to consider. So as part of that process at the moment, we are just trying to capture additional information to inform those additional allocations.
In terms of the capital piece as well, in terms of higher education, in the table there was a 50 million shortfall in terms of the capital there, in terms of what you've asked for and what you've received. What is the impact there in terms of the capital projects then for the higher education sector?
Higher education, whilst it is the largest, it's the area that hasn't been completely funded. You'll notice from the table it was also the area that asked for the most funding. So I think it's 6 million more than their initial allocation last year. Yeah, and only 12 million less than their final allocation. And the department received an additional 9 million last year, which went directly to higher education. The universities are in quite a unique position because of the way that their academic year rolls over the two financial years, that they can actually avail of capital later on in the financial year. So it's one of those areas where you'll see there will probably be further proposals where they can utilise funding later in the year. So the allocation that they have currently got will fully fund their baseline research projects, their postgraduates, and there's some allocations for some of the smaller universities that don't obviously have the same flexibility as the larger ones.
Yes. And in terms of the 14 million overcommitment. Obviously, to me, that seems very unusual. And certainly, when I asked others, it seems an unusual thing to do. I can understand in terms of providing certainty for various organisations and groups, and no doubt they will be glad of that. I suppose you must be very confident then that the £14 million is going to come at some point in the near future. Would that be fair to say?
We have a number of demand-led programmes and a number of programmes that are obviously impacted by changes in the labour market, you know, with our apprenticeship programmes and things like that. And obviously with a lot of organisations with different year ends and with, you know, results and things only coming out later in the year, a lot of those things can move quite dramatically. I suppose when you look at it as a percentage, 14 million as a percentage of, you know, a £800 million budget isn't actually that large an overcommitment. And within that, there's an assumption probably about 5 million at least will come from salaries, because, like, you know, all parts of the public sector, you know, we do carry a significant number of vacancies. Things will be costed based on average salaries, you know, so there will always be movement there. So it's always prudent to build something in around your demand-led programmes and obviously your salaries. Okay, David?
Thank you for your presentation. Looking at 3 numbers is my ideal evening before. Listen, I'm interested in just a couple of figures within it. Intertrade Ireland is we need the dual market access. We need to exploit that. The Minister announced the other day more jobs, yet it's less allocation to Intertrade Ireland. So how are they supposed to deliver that employment, those new jobs, if there's less money going into it?
Intertrade Ireland have received the full allocation that they asked as part of their business plan. I think there might be a slight increase in Intertrade Ireland from last year.
So the 5.85 is that they received last year, the 5.3 that they're receiving this year.
That's protocol. There are other allocations. So what I'm really focused on today is the NI block money. So what we have got from the executive, but a lot of those organisations will receive additional funding later on in the year. So they receive I think it's just under £1 million from the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we have not received confirmation on funding from, but that there is an expectation that that funding will flow at least in line with last year.
So how can they go ahead with new jobs if that funding isn't secure for the
protocol?
The budget for Intertrade Ireland at the minute as it stands is less than what it was at the end of last year, yet you're recruiting new jobs at the start of the year. How is that possible?
But their allocation at the end of the year will have included that £1 million for protocol. So if you take their 5.3 million now, if they get £1 million in for protocol, they'll actually have 6.3 million. And everybody is operating on the assumption that the protocol money will flow. We know will come. They're just waiting. Treasury are doing their budget process now, so a lot of things will be processed through the June monitoring. So we've already received notification of NIO money that's to come. The only thing that's outstanding at the moment is actually the protocol, and we're just waiting on confirmation of the amount.
So they've gone ahead without.
They will. Everybody's going ahead in respect of the protocol funding, and Treasury have been informed that for areas that were previously funded, that happens every year with protocol. It's always, I think a couple of years ago they actually gave us a 2-year programme, but there has to be that expectation that it will.
Interesting, other ministers can't do the same, but that's fine. On the NI screen, seeing the 12, you just asked there about the 11.12 million, 11.8 million. NI screen is also the other one. If you look, it's sort of equal, but it's less than what they were asking. What is the return if that 12? You know, the return for NI screen is massive to the economy. So, what is the benefit to us what's the loss to us if we don't fund them? If that's
I probably need to come back to you with more detail on the loss around that, but I suppose there is a gap on the amount that was requested and the amount that was allocated, and NI screen, you know, has been allocated the same amount that it did get last year.
Okay.
And it's also an area that, you know, we would consider during monitoring rounds if other funding did become available, because they do have a strategy there and can utilise further funding.
Okay. No, well, and then finally, just for me, Invest in I, you know, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over, and getting different results or expecting different results. So is there a pot of money, or is there any funding there available to them to allow transformation within the service? Because it's dropping in what they're doing. I appreciate the salary thing was capped and stuff, but is there a transformation fund to allow them to change or to?
At the moment, there's no additional allocation to Invest NI for a transformation fund. I think there was a presentation maybe previously to yourselves about the progress with the review. So at this point in time, there's an expectation where pressures resulting from the implementation would be found from existing resources, but it is a priority of the Minister. So if they came forward with proposals, it's something that obviously would have to be considered. There will also, all departments will also have the opportunity to bid into the transformation fund that has been set aside by the Executive and the Treasury funded money. I've received no bids in that. That exercise has not been launched yet, but that may be something that's being considered as part of that.
Mike?
Chair, thank you very much. I'm also beginning with arm's length bodies. The Chair had a meeting with your Permanent Secretary on the 7th of May, and the note we received on foot of that was that the Department was largely positive about the budget, and the Perm Sec hoped the opening position for ALBs in 24-25 would largely match the closing position from 23-24, i.e. including all in-year allocations. But let me see, Invest NI finished with 78 last year, but opened with 70.5. Tourism NI finished with 17.8, but go up to 22.5. So one down, one up. NI Screen are static at 20.1. And Tourism Ireland dropped from 22.2 to 17.8. So what happened to disappoint the Permanent Secretary's expectations?
As I referred to earlier, there is a number of additional allocations. So taking Invest, for example, Invest NI last year received additional funding from the NIO, which they will receive, I think, circa 2.45 million in June this year. There was also additional money that came in through the NIO Skills, Employability and Entrepreneurship. I think that was around 5 million for Invest NI last year. So when you're looking at the final allocation, you're looking at it inclusive of all those additional, funding that's coming from UKG.
Why is that not clear in this table? Why aren't there asterisks?
Which table now are you referring to? Is it the one, was it in my briefing?
It was the table papers, isn't it? The table papers that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's our.
So there's
That's our own
there's
information.
my table and then there's the department's table. So, Chairperson, what I've done, excuse me, is use the department's information they provide us previously to give a closing position for 23-24 and comparing that with what we were told the allocation was for 24-25. The department didn't disclose then these other allocations. I was unaware of those. So,
but they would be included, with inside the final position. So if we're giving you final outturn is inclusive of all funding.
24-25.
I think it would have been useful, Joanna, if it had been broken down in terms of. I appreciate what you're saying. It is the final figure, but if it had been broken down in terms of, whatever comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol or whatever comes from.
We weren't, I suppose, when I provided, if it's the paper and final outturn or where Peter got that from, I don't know where that was lifted from, so I suppose maybe even Peter, maybe going forward, if we maybe liaise on that and we can put asterisks around that, but I'm happy to provide a table that will actually set that out, because for our own, I'm looking at it obviously from the baseline block funding, and then we have all of those pots which are really, and this is all the management and making the management of the budget, more difficult.
In terms of our ability to scrutinise, which is a duty that we have, it would be easier if you were to supply disaggregated information in future.
Sorry, so but see the figures that I have provided. There has been none of that funding has actually been confirmed yet. We haven't actually received that allocation.
So you're proceeding at risk?
But the allocations just haven't been provided. We have received confirmation, but we haven't been allocated the budget. So the budget we can report on can only be the budget that we've already been given by the Executive.
That would meet my definition of proceeding at risk. Do you disagree?
We received confirmation. DOF have received confirmation from Treasury it's coming. So
Okay, let's see that. Also on arm's length bodies, I previously asked for return on investment, which the department spectacularly failed to provide. So let's look at it another way. How do you measure value for money from arm's length bodies?
I know that from the last time I was here that a request was put in respect of the return on investment for arm's length bodies, and obviously that varies, depending on the arm's length body and their objectives, but really that would be for the policy area that's dealing with that request to provide that.
And I think we've written to the department in those terms. So finally, if I may, Chair, from me, I'm just looking at the budget document published by the Minister for Finance, and the chapter for the Department for the Economy begins with the economic vision, the 4 key areas. Number 1 is good jobs. How can you invest in something like good jobs when it doesn't have a definition?
Again, as part of the economic vision, the Minister did provide something around the good jobs, but again, that would be something that I wouldn't be placed to answer at this, but it would be better for maybe the policy officials that are leading on the economic vision to provide that. Sorry.
Thanks, Mike. Johnny?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for coming to committee this morning. I suppose probably this is an argument now that this place is increasingly taking part in, as opposed to what was a draft allocation or opening allocation compared to closing position, and it's very misleading actually. And I'm not just talking about the Department of Economy, I mean right across the board. This committee and indeed the Assembly needs to compare like with like if we're to really delve into what's going on behind the scenes. So David Honeyford had mentioned his concern around Intertrade Ireland dropping slightly in relation to the draft allocation compared to the closing position. More worrying for me is actually our own Intertrade Northern Ireland, our own Invest Northern Ireland and their position, given it's a considerable drop. What was Intertrade or Invest NI's original draft allocation in 23-24?
Their final budget for 23-24, excluding all of the alternative funding sources, was 71.5 million.
So, but what? That was the closing. What was it? What was the draft allocation for 23-24? Or the
Start of the financial year?
Yeah.
I don't have that information with me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I would ask that to probably be supplied to the committee, because I want to compare what that was at opening compared to where we are now with opening. What
it was higher than that. My
higher.
memory serves me right, but again, I can confirm this in written. It was around 75 million.
So obviously the funding in between that's been mentioned that you're hopeful will come, but with no confirmation of, you hope would meet up some of the shortfall. In particular, given what we have in front of us, from 78 to say 70, if you look at closing position on Invest NI, does that pose difficulties for Invest NI going forward?
In comparing like with like, which I've taken note that we will provide that. Looking at their final budget for 23-24, Invest NI had 71.5 million, excluding earmarked funding that they get from alternative sources. Looking to the opening budget this year, it's 70.1 million, so that is a reduction of 1.4 million. And the main reason for part of that reduction from the final budget was that all areas last year received an allocation. We got additional funding late in the year last year from the executive, and Invest NI got around £1 million of that, and most of that was to meet the one-off non-consolidated payment to staff that was part of the pay award, so that won't be repeated next year. So that was a cost of circa 1 million that isn't repeated into this financial year. So when you actually exclude that, their final budget allocation is just slightly less than what they got.
That's the benefit of comparing like with like
it is,
from the committees, because we're looking at figures on the table and it can be more deceiving. In relation to energy, so we see draft allocation 10.5. Where are we with the energy question? Because obviously there's huge considerations. We were told about bids in relation to RHI and allocations towards that. Is there any inclusion of that bid within this?
So the £10 million that you referred to is the Resource Dale running costs of the energy group. In addition to that, Energy will receive over £30 million of capital, which they will use to take forward their geothermal, their sustainable energy programme and the public sector Invest to Save energy scheme. In addition, Invest NI have been allocated funding to take forward their energy efficiency scheme, and RHI is dealt with in the AME budget, so any payments in respect of RHI come out of the annually managed expenditure, which there is a set amount, a sort of a cap set by Treasury on that, which we have always more than had enough for.
Okay, and do we envisage that there's a lot of moving parts with relation to an RHI bid for an uplift in tariff? Do we envisage that if that was to go forward, that we would have adequate funds to meet that obligation?
There is adequate funds inside the current AME budget that is set by Treasury.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Saoirse?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming today. I think obviously just to reflect comments from other colleagues, it is quite opaque in terms of trying to understand just from a lay person's perspective some of this, but just on a bit of a different question for that. We hear all the time about inescapable pressures in terms of a budgetary context. I'm just wondering, is there a set sheet for each department that each department says uniformly this is what we all agree is an inescapable pressure, or do each department, is there an agreed definition of inescapable pressures across all departments, and that's what each department then works to?
No.
Okay.
Suppose, we all apply, what the rationale, but for us an inescapable pressure is if you have a contractual obligation, if you have a statutory duty to deliver something. So basically it are those things that you have to meet that you can't basically stop. That is what would be deemed to be an inescapable pressure. That's how we completed our return.
That seems quite sensible to me, but I suppose it's just interesting to note that that isn't actually applied in a uniform way across all government departments, so therefore actually some departments will be bidding things that actually probably aren't really inescapable per se, but just in terms of the wider conversation we've been having around the finances. In terms of apprenticeships, that was one of the things I asked about the last time, and obviously we have some information here where it's put in, I think, apprenticeships, vocational careers and skills, and it's not disaggregated as other colleagues have referred to. The question I asked the last time was, are apprenticeships or any part of that programme at risk? What's your opinion on that now, given the funded envelope?
This financial year, apprenticeships and skills for life and work, which is our entry level, have received an additional 17 million as part of the draft budget allocations, and that is enough to currently maintain those provisions. But obviously, they're very much linked to the labour market and their demand-led schemes. So any increases in that would have to be dealt with, or demands which could be up or down will be dealt with later in the financial year. But as it currently stands, as part of the draft allocations, it should be sufficient to maintain their current provision.
So there should be no cut to skills this year, anyway. Yes. Year after, different ball game. In terms of the additional skills funding that was discussed, that the chair had raised at the start. Obviously it's not for you to say what the Minister may be thinking of funding, but what would be the timescale for that if that was to be additional monies available for skills?
The skills and education policy officials are working as a matter of urgency on developing those proposals to present to the Minister, and then the allocations can be made as quickly as possible after that.
In terms of some of the IT things as well, in terms of either capital or other investments, what are those IT investments? Are they in-house things, or are they other?
It will be in-house. Some of that will be your normal maintenance. So for example, 2 million is paid every year to the student loans company for maintaining that obviously very large database, that students apply to every year for student funding. There is 1 million earmarked for the careers portal, which is starting on starting on that really exciting journey in the development of that, that huge IT project. So that's to fund that discovery stage and to start with that sort of
Was
development.
that to enable a tender to go out to procurement then?
I think the way it normally works, and I'm no IT expert, is the discovery phase is normally done with, with that with some sort of a contractor where you basically story map, you look at, what you need, and that sort of helps you then to develop to the next stage. So I think now with the way they do IT, it's maybe multiple stages. It would be, then alpha, beta, and, on to others. So, but the full ask is provided in year 4, that has been provided in the allocations.
Yeah, just lastly, Chair, in terms of procurement generally, are there any areas of procurement that you work with other government departments on to achieve efficiencies or maximise value for public money?
Again, I'm not, I wouldn't be the procurement, official here, but I do know that there are a number of government contracts, and we obviously have frameworks and things like that, which would be used to sort of maximise that efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Padraig?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I have to say I actually found the figures quite easy to understand, so don't know, but I found them pretty clear cut. I think for me, they highlight the fact that there's both quantitative and qualitative results for all these as well, and I think that if we compare to the previous years, it's a lot more targeted in terms of how that funding, and it really outlines, I suppose, the ministerial priorities and allows those to be developed. I'm going to be very parochial and ask a question about McGee. So it's just to get a breakdown in that funding as well. So obviously you've laid out the funding for McGee there. Are there any more specific details on how that funding will be spent, firstly this year, but also in terms of projections going forward as well?
Those allocations were based on high-level marker bids, and officials are continuing to work with the university to refine the details of those, so that could be provided to the committee at a later point when those are refined.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, all my other questions have kind of been answered, but to me it ties on very well with the ministerial priorities. I think it's pretty clear cut to me, so thank you.
Thanks. I suppose in terms of clear cut, what we're asking for is the starting position for 23-24, just so we have a better benchmark, but also in terms of the detail, because for me, and Mike used the word at risk, and I would share that word, because for me, when I look at that, I don't see where the other funding sources are from. We have no guarantee that those are coming, whilst there may be private conversations been had or assurances. We don't know. So that in terms of the detail, as I say, we see the figures, but we don't have the detail to compare with the opening position from last year. And obviously the clerk had kindly provided the closing position, but the opening position would be particularly useful. Sinead?
Okay. I just want to ask about the initial allocation for city deals. In page 11 you talk about as an interim allocation, and it's anticipated of further 29.4 million to be allocated later in the year to bring it up to the funding requested. Whenabouts later in the year, and when will that be?
We're hoping that that'll be done as part of June monitoring. That is one of the reasons June monitoring has to take place. It's to allocate those other pots of funding. So, that's what DOF, and I think the Minister of Finance said in her paper as well, that she anticipates that to come probably in June monitoring.
Right, okay. And then just quickly on McGee as well, obviously a task force has been set up, and there's been assurances given by the Minister that, when they bring forward a report and the way forward, that there will be money allocated to that. Obviously, that's not this money, it's not the 4.1 because it's capital. So where in the budget would that money be?
4.1 million of resource has been allocated, and there's almost 15 million of capital that has been allocated as well.
Will that be 24-25 budget?
24-25 budget.
No, I mean the task force, when it brings forward its report and how do you, the expansion, and will there be money in this budget to bring steps forward for that task force to move on with, or will that be in next year's budget?
It would probably be next year and future year budgets. Obviously if it's to be a major construction project, and things like that, they will form part of future year budgets. But there is, as I said, that pot of money that has been set aside, which will probably, I'm sure there will be consultation with the task force in respect of that as well.
And the 4.1, okay, thanks.
Mike?
When Mr. Buckley asked you about RHI, you indicated there's a ring-fenced amount of money every year from AMI, Annual Managed Expenditure, which is more than sufficient for RHI. What happens to the surplus?
AME budgets, by their very nature, are annually managed, but there will be a limit on certain things that they will measure the amount. So, say based on the English scheme, so you can't. So the envelope of funding with which Northern Ireland can then spend within is maxed to a certain amount, but they're demand-led schemes. That's why they're done in an annually managed. So it just remains with Treasury if it's not spent.
So the reality is you can access a percentage of that AME money for the RHI scheme, and the rest you cannot access.
As far as I know, the money is for renewables, so it's set at renewables. It's not designated solely for RHI, but again, I would need to confirm that with energy officials.
Yeah, I just think we need to be clearer in terms of that AME pot of money, because it is my understanding that we cannot access it while the non-domestic RHI continues.
Thank you. Well, no other members have indicated. Oh, sorry, Saoirse.
Okay, I thought others may have had more questions. Just one last question. In terms of the recommendations coming off the RHI report, were there any recommendations that had a financial value possibly attached to the implementation of them? And is that something that the department's considering in terms of the budgetary position?
I don't know. I haven't been privy to what that plan is. Again, that would be one for the energy policy officials to answer.
But even if there were other recommendations that weren't necessarily relating to energy but were part of a wider departmental process in terms of whether it be organisational development, cultural awareness, training, HR related type of things, would there be any sort of financial value attached to the implementation of those recommendations?
In respect of the energy group itself?
Just anywhere in the department.
It is a priority within the four, the four priorities, the decarbonisation one. So obviously, it would be something that would be given high thought and probably priority if a bid was submitted for something like that.
Okay, well, thanks members, and thanks Joanna and Niamh and Susan as well for coming along today and for providing us with the briefing. Obviously there were a few points that we will follow up with you, particularly in respect to the detail, and hopefully we can get that as soon as possible. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Literally asked the question.
Okay members, so what I'm going to suggest is that we summarise the actions obviously from that discussion, and then I'm going to just take a short break before we go and receive the it's a written briefing, then we're going to close session in terms of the raised briefing. So we're going to ask the clerk first of all maybe just to summarise some of the points.
So, Chairperson, is the committee content to write to the department just seeking further information on the money, the opening position and the closing position for 2023-24, and asking them to set out to disaggregate all of those other money that they get from the protocol wherever, so you can compare like with like. We're also seeking the Invest NI, in particular their opening budget. There's a question about AME budgets and what can they be used for, and I think, if I got Ms. Eastwood's question right, this is about RHI recommendations and the costs. Was there, sorry, did I get that right? Was there something extra?
Yeah, that was it.
And do we want to do the NI screen thing, or was that answered?
Well, the figures will come through. You'll answer it. It's because
you'd asked about the economic consequences.
Oh, sorry, the economic consequences. Yeah, so just if you don't invest in that.
Well, I think that an NI screen, there's obviously a value in terms of the contribution that they have. If you take that away, what would be the result?
Sure. Johnny, and through to the clerk, is this something that you've noticed becoming more of a habit? Because one thing that I have probably seen across the assembly is that I understand. I think we all understand things happen during the year. There's reallocations. We know that. But from a comparative point of view, is this something that's relatively recent and I'm not just saying this department, I mean across the board, where we're showing figures to closing to make it look like, well, your new budget allocations not as bad as you think?
I bring the clerk in, but in fairness, the 23-24 closing position was put in by the clerk.
Yep.
At the table,
so because he had no other information to go with. That's the point.
So, members, briefly then, before this, I was the clerk of the Finance Committee, and this was an issue. So it's not to do with the minister. This is something across all of the departments. The treatment of monitoring rounds is you're shown a figure on a page. is that a good number or is that a bad number? I don't know. The only way to know is, well, what was it last year?
Yeah.
And what will it be the year after and the year after? So that you know, in the Department for Work and Pensions, they will produce projections 3 years back and 3 years forward for things like Social Security. I mean, nobody actually knows how much the Social Security bill is going to be, but they are fit to produce projections on that. So my argument when I was finance clerk was departments are fit to do that too. So they should be able to take all of those budget lines and say, this is what it was, closing position the last 3 years. Here's what we'd like it to be, what we think it would be in the next 3 years. And then you could look at those and go, oh, well, that's good for a Northern Ireland screen. Or, oh, no, that's not enough for skills or what have you. And you could make up your minds. And part of your role is to be helpful to the minister. So the minister can't possibly, even a really great minister, can't possibly be across all the detail. So you could look at those and go, oh, that's scary, or no, that's good, or what have you, and tell the minister, and therefore be helpful to him or her. So that is the position I've taken on that, but it's up to members to push on this or not.
Sinead,
No, it's just back to the permanent secretaries, first reading that the budgets will be in line with the closing. Well, it simply isn't. So it may be quite maybe in line with the opening, but we don't have the details there. So it's just, it's not transparent at all. So, but the permanent secretary said this, I would say it's only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and when in the meeting with
7th of May. 7th of May was the meeting.
I mean, I just don't understand.
Sorry, Chair. To be fair, the numbers aren't bad for economy. That looking at the different budget lines and the apprenticeships members were concerned about, and that seems to be about the same. So the numbers are not that bad, really, compared to some other departments. So that I can understand why he said what he did, but they just haven't. This is what they do. Whenever you think how much easier it would have been if the clerk had not included that table, and they would have thrown a bunch of numbers at you, and you just would have gone, "Oh, that seems okay or not okay." But by making a fool of myself in front of the members, what I've done is, but this is what I did as finance clerk as well, is that we keep pushing on the department, provide us more and more detail. I'll get it wrong, you'll say you're an idiot, and then we'll ask the department for more information, and that's a positive process.
I think in terms
of... Don't take it personally, Peter.
In terms of we have the closing position. The difficulty being is that because we don't have the money from the outside sources, that is the issue, and that is something that we do not control. We can control. The minister can control her budget allocation for her department. The outside sources, we need to see sight of what those outside sources are and whether or not that is matched with what was last year, because we don't know. We actually don't know if that's the case. As I say, we've had assurances that may be the case. Mike and then Patrick.
It's still the fact, Chair, that the note, the permanent secretary on the 7th of May told our chair that the opening would match the closing from last year. And it doesn't, with the exception of Screen NI. So even if there's more money coming in year, the opening doesn't match the closing.
I think we should write to him on that point, possibly, if members are in
So
agreement.
tourism NI is up.
Yeah.
Tourism Ireland's down.
Patrick?
Can we get the clarification around McGee, around that fund?
Very much so, absolutely. Yeah, that McGee was raised. So are members happy enough then that, let's say, those couple of points, are members agreed that we write to the permanent secretary just to ask in terms of a point of clarification? Obviously, I personally wasn't at that meeting, but we have a note which was...
It hasn't been contested.
Yeah, so I think we should ask just in terms of clarification whether or not that still stands.
Chair, can I take my leave now?
You can indeed, Jeanette, and we're just going to take a few minutes break actually before we go into the next item. So we'll take 5 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30, 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 sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Sound. Committee Room 30, 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 sound.
Okay, members, we're back in public session. I'll just run through the items of correspondence. If members want to turn to their packs at 297, there's an index summary of the correspondence. There's quite a number of items, but I'm going to rattle through them here as best we can. Item 2 is at page 301. Members are asked to note correspondence in response to committee queries in respect of the reported shortage of developable land and plans for the development of the Maze Long Cache site. The Department advises that the First and Deputy First Ministers are to meet with the Maze Long Cache Board in the coming weeks and appears to advise that a strategy will be brought forward in September of this year in respect of the treatment of land for development with District Council partners. Formal structures, of course, are under consideration. Is the committee content to note pending a departmental briefing on Invest NI progress in September 2024? Saoirse?
Could I put forward a suggestion, Chair, that we potentially ask the corporation to come to committee at some point? I understand it does fall under the remit of the Executive Office, but clearly there is a much bigger regional role for MLK site. Leave that open for other members if they're content.
Members content with it?
I think we should hear, first of all, what's come. I have no problem with that in the longer term, but I think we need to hear what the progress is following the September announcement, if that's what it's going to be. I have no problem after that, but mightn't be able to do it before that anyway.
I think we should probably just get a request in anyway, Johnny, because I doubt that. Yeah.
I think we put the request and take their views as to whether or not it will be beneficial
Yeah.
prior to September or after September, if members are content. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Saoirse. Item number.
Are we going to hear back following the FMDFM meeting on this? Or are we not going to hear back until September?
I suspect before it, yeah.
Well, then, yeah.
Item number 3 is at page 304. Members are asked to note a response to the committee queries in respect of the Shared Prosperity Fund and support for NICFA's labour market partnerships. The Department advises that it is cooperating with DFC in developing labour market interventions, and DOF is engaging with the Department for Levelling Up and
Housing and
Communities in respect of the next round of SPF funding. Are members content to forward this to NICFA for information?
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 4, members, at page 310, members are asked to note a response to committee queries in respect of the Shared Prosperity Fund and support for NICFA's labour market partnerships from the Minister for Levelling Up. The Minister advises that decisions in respect of the Shared Prosperity Fund will be taken at the next spending review. The Minister also refers to a simplification programme, the funding simplification programme. Members content again that we forward this to NICFA for information?
Yep.
Item 5, page 313. Members are asked to note an oral ministerial statement from the North-South Ministerial Council meeting held on 26th of April. Members will have it in their tabled papers. Are members content to note this statement?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, Philip.
Just to help you, see the actions where it's saying suggested approach to take and its note.
Yeah.
I'm happy to propose we note all of them, and if you want to go through the ones where maybe there's a different action.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, just bear with me.
It's pretty much all note. There's one of it. It's just Chair. Absolutely. Look, there's a bit about city and growth.
Okay.
That I kind of wanted, and it's really just a note. But it's just to take members through the governance arrangements for city and growth deals. Just
okay, go ahead, Clerk. Yeah.
Sorry, members. If you go to item 11, page 362, this is from the Department of Finance in respect of city and growth deals, jobs and job creation and governance. There's a lot of information. What you can see from there's like a timeline thing on page 369. And that tells you that lots of decisions are about to be taken in 24-25, lots of activity in the subsequent years. The department has asked the committee to treat a lot of this information as sensitive. The number of jobs to be created is at pages 377 to 378. So they've actually broken them down by salary band and stuff, and what the different sectors would be. Additionally, DOF advises that the city and growth deals are not a single programme. So there are 4 separate projects, and the SROs from the Department of Finance, Northern Ireland Office and DLUC are not accountable for delivery. Page 393 shows the overall approval process where its departments sign off the business cases via casework committee, taking advice from DLUC. Programme boards are led by the councils, it seems, and they're responsible for delivery. So when I read about it, I thought, this is Prince 2, the SROs are in charge of everything, but no, it's not like that. These are 4 separate projects, not one overall programme. In summary, you have the SROs, and reporting to them is a delivery board, which reviews the risk register. An oversight group is below them, and they maintain the risk register. A working group is below them, and they deal with the implementation. And then there are a number of programme boards for each of the different projects, which are led by the relevant district council, and which write the business cases, and they will be advised by a pillar advisory board. The all I was going to say is that these are all under active consideration by the Finance Committee, and if the committee is also content to forward these to your colleagues in the Committee for Communities and the Committee for Infrastructure.
If there was any questions, are you content with that approach?
Sure. Did we get anything back on, remember the query which was, is there an ability to phase some of them?
Yes, they actually commented on that. What did they actually say? If I go to page 362, it will tell me what they say. Because, I remember the point that the member made. And where is it? No, that's not it. Breakdown of jobs. Phasing, yes, that's at page 364 near the bottom. They're saying that they noted and welcomed the support for phasing. Regular engagement continues with each deal, which includes pragmatic ways to progress the projects and deals with the UKG policy parameters. And they are seeking to move the things along as quickly as possible.
They're not really committing to the concept. It's. I noted that I think costs are only going to rise in all of these projects as time goes on. I still think we need to push on the phasing aspect. I know that's certainly something that's being pushed by district councils, those outside the Belfast City region one anyway, that have a significant amount of catching up to do. That if we assume that every every project has to have a full business case before you can proceed, you know, we might never see the light of day on some of them.
Okay, so we could write to the Department of Finance
Yeah.
in those terms, because you're concerned about inflation on timescales. Yeah.
The cost increase, and which then risks the viability of all of these other projects.
Agreed, Chairperson.
Everybody content with that project? Yeah, okay. The only other item then, Clerk, that I can see in terms of the actions was item number 14, which members are asked to, and it's on page 433, members are asked to consider information provided in relation to an LCM on the arbitration bill. Is the committee content to seek the views of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, CBI and the Federation of Small Businesses in relation to this bill?
Great.
Just to get their views, yeah. Members content. All the other items then, members, are for note, so we're in agreement, yeah. Okay, members, the forward work programme is at page 456 of your pack. The clerk, do you want to talk us through that briefly?
Thanks, Chair. Just to remind members that the Economy Committee meeting on the 29th of May will start at 10 and will be very short. That will be then immediately followed by a joint concurrent meeting with the Education Committee on careers issues. That will take place from 10:30, so we'll be in the plenary chamber. We'll come there at 10 o'clock, we'll do a quick meeting, there's correspondence, there's statutory rule, we'll just get that done if members are content, and then we'll do this joint concurrent meeting where Deirdre Hughes will come along and talk about the independent review of careers guidance. DE and DFE officials will come in afterwards and talk about that. Dual market access papers were scheduled to be considered this week. Department didn't actually provide them till yesterday, so these will be included in your committee meeting pack for the 29th. And the Department is also asked to delay the brief on the consultation on proposed changes to the disability support provided to young people on entry-level and level 1 programmes until after summer recess. This was scheduled originally for 3rd of July, so they're just not quite ready. If members are content with the forward work programme as amended, Chairperson?
Members content? Yeah. Any other business? Yes, Saoirse.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to get a bit more info about the joint session then. So that's education in the chair, isn't it?
Yes, it'll be Nick, yeah.
Yeah. And is there a wider format?
It'll be just a
Just
really
as
big
per.
committee meeting, so that
Okay.
we're sitting in the plenary chamber. You can do it like a wedding with the economy on one side and the education on the other, if you like.
I would so love that wedding because I've been looking forward to this meeting for a long time.
Pick a seat, not a side.
Can we get a wall of potato crisps as well?
And I assume then when we're indicating to speak, etc., what do you raise in your place or what?
No, it's just like a committee meeting. We're only in there because the Senate isn't ready yet. Yeah,
Yeah, but if you want to speak, just signal.
It's me. I'll be clerking it. So like, not that I'm going to prefer the economy committee members or anything like it, but just do what you normally do. And it should be grand.
Sure. Okay enough? Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's fine. It's something. Yep. Look forward to it next week. So, members, there's no other items of business. So, date and time of next meeting, as has been explained, is next Wednesday, 10 a.m. in the plenary chamber, Parliament buildings. Put the question. The meeting now adjourned. Meeting adjourned.
Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound.